Hey guys, welcome. Thank you for being here today. On this episode of MSP Mindset, I'm talking with Greg Bibeau. We're going to talk about how small business owners, and I mean you, MSPs, can break the cycle of self-sabotage. I can raise my hand on this one. I've done these things. So let's talk about how you can, and just to give you a quick, those of you tuning in, a quick idea of what we're going to talk about. The process Greg embraced to get out of his own way, how he quit doing the work of 3 or 4 or more people, how he set clear expectations and set accountability. So if those things sound interesting and how that impacts your MSP and how to do this, not just theoretically, but in the real world, then stay tuned. So a little bit of Greg. He is the founder and CEO of Terminal B. Greg, on a personal note, started off in Massachusetts, but is now in Austin, Texas, coming to us live here, and has been at MSP for 25 plus years. So must be a glutton for punishment like me. He empowers companies to kind of improve their productivity, help through technology-focused solutions, and helps prepare them to scale. So enough of that. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, Damien. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So just to kind of tee this up, we were talking about this, and I'd love for you to set the stage a little bit, right? You've been in MSP for quite a while, not some of the changes we're talking about, you've only made more recently in the last few years. So help paint the picture, if you don't mind, of the before, some of these changes.
The Terminal B was founded in 2004, and like all MSPs, we would do anything that we could to survive early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had adopted a mindset over the years that, because my background is not in tech, that um, I would do everything that the firm would need that wasn't related to delivering a service. So, what is that? That includes client management, that includes billing, that includes sales, that includes marketing, and the list goes on. And so
Right.
I thought that was a pretty good strategy because I wanted my focus. I wanted to make sure I was hiring people that could deliver high quality service. And I was going to take everything off of their plate so that they could, in fact, do that. Well, what ends up happening over time is you realize that as you're doing these 5 or 6 really jobs, you're not doing any of them particularly well. And in fact, you are doing them in a way that tends to be convenient for you because you have so many of these roles. This was a huge epiphany for me, and it wasn't one that I just had a realization one day. It came over time when, I think it was about 3 years ago. I had just had enough of our approach to problems resulting in the same outcomes where things weren't being done correctly, or we had talked about something or experienced an issue in the past and it would happen again. So I think as business owners, those that are willing to take the jump or the leap into becoming an MSP or any business for that matter, we're very particular in what our expectations are and don't really have patience for things not to go the way that we envision. And that's a problem as you want to grow because, you can't play every instrument in the orchestra. And so
Right.
if you don't adopt a framework that will allow you to relinquish control in a way that solidifies trust, then what ends up happening is you just never grow. You never grow. And more than likely, you'll end up burning out. And that's where we were about 3 years ago, where 2.5, 3 years ago, where, I was just telling myself that if this is the best that we're able to do, then I'm in the wrong place. And that's a tough thing to be asking yourself as a business owner, who founded the firm.
I feel
You know,
that,
after all these
especially I
years,
feel
am I in
like
the right spot?
I feel like there's some degree of MSP and burnout almost seems synonymous. I know I was an MSP and it's just like work harder, work faster, or I'll learn a new skill, or there'll be new cool tech that I can implement that will just magically drive revenue or drive
Yep.
efficiencies or something. Keep chasing
Yep.
those, and that's what seems like it leads to burnout. I know I've talked to so many people that have said the same thing. I've talked to somebody that said,
Yep.
"Look, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore,"
Hmm.
because they get there. So, so you were at the point where you were getting closer to being burned out.
I was, and I affectionately call it my nervous breakdown, although it may not medically be defined that way. That's sure what it felt like because it was a big burden on my shoulders to try to grow a firm that it feels like you're swimming upstream.
Right.
You want to all be rowing in the same direction, and if you're the only one, if the visionary or the owner of the company is constantly working against all the other forces in his organization or her, um, it just never works out, right? You either won't grow, which is not what the desired outcome, or you'll burn out, which is can be even worse.
Or both.
Yeah, or
Right.
both,
Bonus
or both.
points.
In
Both
fact,
can be
right,
very likely, right?
right.
So what was the breaking point, or what
So
drove you to make a
yeah,
change? Because we all
yeah.
could just
So
stay in our same rut,
and I'll tell
right?
you, this is not going to be uncommon to those listening if they own an MSP. When you're small and one of the hats you wear is sales, there was a point in time where I had made every sale for everyone at our company, right? Everyone,
Mm-hmm.
not every sale for all the revenue that came in was sales that I made, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of relationships with business owners and that comes with expectations from those owners. So honestly, if it was to be one thing, I can't remember the exact issue that cropped up, but it was an owner of a business calling me, asking me why something either wasn't working or why their expectations weren't met. They didn't phrase it like that, but that's what I heard. We are not
Mm.
even meeting expectations. And that is a kick in the teeth for an owner is when another business owner of a client calls you and says, why can't you get this right? Now, don't get me wrong. We, even at that point, did a lot of things well, right? We were just, but we just didn't have a mechanism, and it rose to the very highest level of the organization. At that point, I still tell my staff to this day, when issues rise to my level, we haven't really done our job because there's nothing that should go right to the CEO, right? That means that there's been many steps along the way that either haven't been defined or have been missed. And so
Let me
I just
unpack
received
that.
one of those call. Yeah, I was just going to say I received one of these calls, and I was just like, it was the whole, we can't keep doing this. It's the whole definition of insanity, right?
Right. So let me unpack what you were just saying. Because I mean, like a lot of things where I learn at least, you go, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But it's also just you're growing, you're adding people. In the early days, you're just like, I don't know, go implement the things or go monitor devices. But if you need something, call me or ask me or what have you. So you said something though that if it rises to the CEO, then there's a bigger issue. So help me understand why
Sure.
that is a bigger issue.
So, well, if you recall earlier in the discussion, I said that I was doing everything that wasn't tech related. This
Right.
means that mostly tech minded people were driving the rest of the organization on the service delivery side. Um, we've made great strides here in the last several years since this turnaround, if you will. But I had a lot of engineering brains here, and engineering brains don't always look at issues from a customer standpoint. They look at it from a check the box. Did we do what we're going to say we're going to do? Not from the softer customer service side. So a lot of times you can have a business owner on the phone saying, you got not necessarily you failed us, but something's not right. And you can have a tech on the other side that says we did everything we were supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of issues are fundamentally are issues that are fundamentally broken in your organization. You need other people in the organization that have the wherewithal to say, hey, we may have done that, but when you put yourself in the shoes of the customer, it's very understandable why they're upset or why their expectations weren't met. Do we even define expectations? So this, you can see that this started a process of us peeling back the onion that required a level of understanding throughout the organization on how to approach what we do. You know, I people may not agree with this, but I tell this to my staff all the time. As an MSP, we have more in common with UPS in logistics than we do with Microsoft in developing technology. Our job is to make sure that technology works where and when our clients want to use it, right? So it's a logistical thing. Logistics are not, oftentimes there's perception on that. And if you're not aligned in the perception of what you're delivering and what's expected that you're going to be delivering, you're going to have those issues all the time. That is not something that should rise to the CEO, in my opinion. And it doesn't now in the organization, but I'm certainly able and willing to take a call from anybody that could help our business evolve, right? If someone's needs aren't being met, I want to know. If it does come to me, that's okay, but that shouldn't be what drives resolution.
Right.
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 There should be no issues where an owner of another firm has to call me, the owner of our firm, to get any kind of technical matter resolved.
Yes. 100% agree. Although been in that spot a lot more than I would like to admit.
I think any MSP owner that says they haven't is lying.
Yeah, for sure. Got a lot of people still joining us. Thanks, Morgan, for commenting. If you comment, we'll do our best to get to your questions. So if you like what we're saying or just want to make fun of us or have a question, drop them in the comments. So it kind of led up to this, the process that you embraced. Let us hear that. Let's talk about that. We talked about you painting the picture.
So we embarked on EOS, which is common. Looking back, it has been a total game changer for our firm. But I will say that EOS is simply a framework, and it's not the only framework. So while it's worked very well for us, I have come across other individuals that say it's not for them. That may be the case, but here's what I will say. Business owners are, to put it lightly, particular. And the only way they will... right. It's a tongue in cheek, I guess. But the only way that we as owners will trust our staff is if we know they will execute in a manner that is in line with what we would do if we were in that position, or the philosophy in which the company was founded or evolved. So when we did EOS, we started at the very beginning. I went back to documents that I wrote 15 years before that. Why am I getting into this space? What is it that we hope to deliver to our clients? What's our differentiator? We had gotten too far away from that. And so we revived all those, and we reevaluated and refined our core values. That's really, this process starts there. We went through redefining everything about our operations and our service, and started throwing everything on a list that did not go the way we wanted. And we didn't really pull any punches. Like if we thought there was a better way, or if there's a problem that we kept coming across, we talked about it as a group. So going back to the framework, in the absence of a framework, an owner like myself has no mechanism just to be able to trust that staff's going to execute. The process that we went through, there was a lot of defining things and a lot of expectations that were set, along with KPIs. Not everybody's a fan of KPIs, but the reality is that, we did EOS with Kyle Christensen of K7, was our implementer. And the reality is, and he said this, and I didn't want to hear it at the time, but looking back, he was dead right. And that is, you're going to lose some employees and you're going to lose some clients because they just don't all fit into the mold that, of the organization that you have, or that you want, really, not that you have, that you want. And so we did lose employees. The process, if you will, did not resonate with all of them. Some clients did not like that we further defined some activities that were largely undefined and nebulous and played out in their favor. Um, but I will say the results were very telling. Not only did I, as an owner, have a framework that I could trust, um, as I mentioned, when I began relinquishing control and trusting my employees, the things they were capable of blew me out of the water. Like it was like they were craving this opportunity, right? And
Nice.
so when we talk about getting in the way, that was probably after we started this process. It was maybe about 2 months when we were in. I was just like, it occurred to me that I was the problem. Like I had staff, not all staff, because some staff ended up going, but the key staff that I was working with, and a lot of staff that are still here today, understood the opportunity and the realization we had as an organization that everybody has a seat at the table and everybody's able to grow. And that is
Nice.
so important, because I think there's, if there's technicians, sysadmins, even help desk folks that are watching this now, um, I think they would be surprised of what they're able to achieve if given the role in their organization to do more. And often the blocker there is the owner at a certain size, right? Once you get past a certain size and there's more formalities in the organizational structure, that changes a bit. But in smaller organizations, I think once you get folks rowing in the same direction and you get out of their way, the results are amazing, right? You get the right people in the right seats and you trust them to do things that they're going to do. The framework then allows you to understand that what you've trusted them to do, they either are or are not doing. And
Right.
if they're not doing those things, then you have discussions around, are there barriers that need to be removed? Are you hitting a ceiling yourself as an employee? Like, is there too much that's expected of you? Or are you simply not able to achieve the results or the goals that we talked about? But it gives, by looking through a lens like EOS, and again, it could be any framework. What it allowed us to do in the organization that was severely lacking before was have accountabilities from employees to the
Yeah.
owner, and the owners to the employees, right? It's a two-way trust. And I think if you were to ask our employees, that they would very much tell you that they've been enabled to do more, which is very fulfilling for them in their roles.
So we're talking about, guys, drop any questions you have, but just, for the you guys that's just tuning in or watching it later, we're talking about EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System. Get the book Traction if you'd like to read it. But Gino Wickman, happy to comment, let us know if you'd like links or other things. And folks on my team will be happy to drop those there for you. And there could be any other framework. It doesn't have to be the framework you choose, right? But it's one that I know that we're using. I know the one that you're using as well. As a entrepreneur, as a tech person and entrepreneur, and perhaps recovering perfectionist, we'll see. One of the common things in any framework and in the US is, well, I can just do it myself. I can read the book and I can do it. But I heard you mention you hired a firm, K7 and Kyle Christensen, and said, we want to have some help in that regard. There's others you can, but what's your opinion on do it yourself versus hiring somebody to help you actually make this transition? Because it's not free.
Well, it's not free. And what I will say is, I very strongly encourage someone, either an external person or an internal person, to be driving the process, but
Mm-hmm.
not the owner. The notion that the owner can just do it, well, I mean, yeah, that technically, can that happen? Yeah, but it's unlikely. And the reason why is because you need that voice that's constantly telling you you shouldn't be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be having this problem, right? Like, we get too familiar with each other. Someone works for you for a long time, you get very familiar with them. They know what to say to you, to kind of get off the hook. And it's hard to implement a program, where there's new expectations with old relationships and old habits. And
Mm-hmm.
so the implementer is not needed indefinitely, but they are very much, I would encourage it very early on, and even kicking off the process, because that's going to tell you, they're going to keep you on track in ways that you just, I mean, again, it's possible, but it's less likely you're going to have the same impact if you're doing it yourself. Now, I have talked to folks where they've had like an admin that's gone in and essentially becomes the implementer. And if that's possible, that might work as well, where they're the ones holding people accountable, at the meetings, and they're keeping the structure of the meetings and all of that kind of thing. But I think an outside voice that holds you accountable, they don't, when we worked with Kyle, he never really told us what to do or what we were doing wrong. He was helping us learn how to be accountable to each other. And that was, it's the simple things, right? Like, you don't think about that. It's like, yeah, if I say this all the time, as MSPs, we constantly say, well, we can just do that ourselves. Well,
Exactly.
that's not the value prop that we offer our customers, right? Like our customers in a lot of cases can do these things themselves, but it's not what they do. And it's not necessarily what they do well. And so if that's the case, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to consider eating your own dog food in this instance, to make sure that you get a good start. Because you know what, if it doesn't work, if you go on your own, and it's just going to be a frustrating mess, I think you're going to see yourself banging your head against the wall.
Right.
So, I think it can be done, but I actually think there's a tremendous amount of value in working with someone that not only does it with other organizations, but holds you accountable in ways that you probably wouldn't do on your own.
Right. We were talking backstage about backup and testing and verification and that sort of thing. Any words of wisdom that you would share with others after having gone through so much of that over the years?
Yeah. The first is no specific instances that I can at least share, but make sure you verify your backups, because backups are definitely not a set it and forget it.
Right.
Your clients will very much appreciate that those backups are verified, as will their and your insurance company. The other thing that we've had issues with in the past is that customers don't understand RTOs. And they have expectations that their data can just come down from the cloud seamlessly and in no time at all. And so I don't think we used to not have enough conversations about this, but we certainly do now, to make sure customers understand the implications of cheap storage, if you will, because that always doesn't necessarily align with what their expectations are to get systems back up and running.
Right. You do backup, so therefore it must always work. But you test or
Right. And
verify
they're
anyway.
always available.
And it'll be instant, right? Like everything
Right.
should be.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
totally relate to that. So speaking of that, guys, this show is brought to you by Servosity, sponsored by Servosity. And so my story, guys, is I was an MSP who was growing really quickly and blessed to be doing so. The problem was I wouldn't let go, like we were just talking about, of this process, and I was managing the backups. Now I still fixed them; the green dots turned red, but I was horrified to learn that even though the software said it was successful, I couldn't recover my biggest client. 5 servers, they're down. I had to go and tell them, I've completely failed you. And that's when I learned there are so many ways that an untested backup can bite you. And so what does Servosity do? Real quickly, only 2 things that are really, really different. We manage the backups for you, so you don't have to do all the babysitting, and you can redeploy your most valuable people on the things that really and truly differentiate you as a MSP. And secondly, we test them. We believe any backup that's untested is Schrodinger's backup. And so we test the backups monthly, daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly. And it's all done for you, frankly, so that the 98%, not just the 1 or 2% that will pay extra, but so that the 98% who, the other 98% of your clients can have well-tested backups. So if you're interested in that, servosity.com/deep dive. Thank you for sharing that, Greg.
I'm sure all MSPs, error and omission policy holders would love to know that backups are well accommodated for.
Yeah, I'm passionate about this because privately in one-on-one conversations, every MSP tells me I don't test backups. Like I got one or two clients that pay me a lot extra, perhaps. For them, yes. Everybody else, it's either annually or most often never. Now it doesn't say that on their website. They don't want to talk about it, and frankly, I don't blame them because I didn't either. Right? So this isn't an attack on MSPs. This is a safe place. Feel free to drop a comment if you don't back up or test, or if you don't back up, then that's a different conversation. But if you don't test your
So
backups,
it's a great juxtapose on the engineer versus the client expectations, right?
yeah,
Backups are running, but when the client wants their data back and it's not there or it's corrupted or something like that, what do you mean? That's total misalignment, and that kind of goes back into what we were talking about earlier, that you need to have that customer service philosophy and or the customer's viewpoint at heart in mostly everything that you do.
yes, and it's my thought is it ties in. Love your thoughts, Greg, to people and process because we we're doing what might have been considered the best practices and using one of the top two or three backup vendors at the time when I lost data. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't that we were just woefully, um, uh, off in terms of what most people would call a standard of care. We were doing what most would consider a standard of
Right.
care.
Yep.
And that's when I realized every system can take backups of corrupted systems and not tell you. And I've since learned things like screenshots don't actually validate the data. They don't actually show you anything about the database or the file system. They're not testing. And so, and the reason I say this, for most of the existing history of Stravosity, we had a differentiator, but we were like every other backup vendor. Here's our tools. It does these things. It's great. We'll train you. Call us if you need anything. And what I've realized, and I believe in my heart, is any good modern tooling can do the job. The problem isn't the tooling. It's the people and the process. So
Yeah,
much
we'd
so
say
that
that.
comment if you're interested, but we give away, it's called Steal My Process. So I've been doing this for 18 years at this company plus my MSP before, and we built a process that you could run with any tool. So if you want to steal it, just let me know. I'll happily give it away because it's like you're saying, if you don't have the right expectations, the right people, and the right processes, nothing's really getting done.
We say that constantly here at Terminal B, and it's never about the tools. It's
Right.
never about the tools. Your clients don't care what kind of tools you're using. And so
I've
nothing is
never
truly
ever heard a
automated.
business owner say, "Oh, you use ConnectWise or Kaseya or whatever. I'm
Right.
going with you."
Right.
They don't even know
In
what that
fact, if you were to
is.
poll a lot of business owners, they probably couldn't even tell you what the backup software is. But they will
Right.
absolutely be able to tell you, your client in particular, that conversation that you had with them a number of years ago where you couldn't get their data back, right? So that's an excellent, backups are an excellent example of how there's a gap between what the MSP's role from an engineer standpoint thinks it is and what the owners of the companies of your clients understand the role to be.
Well, I wanted to bring it up because as a senior person, owner, whatever you want to call it, at the company, wouldn't relinquish. We grow quickly, and we grow so quickly. We really, frankly, got to the point where it's like, do you know how to do any tech stuff? Cool, you're hired. Go do
Right,
things
right.
because we grew really quickly, and that's not a good. It sounds kind of glamorous, but it's really utter chaos. And for those reasons, I wouldn't relinquish it. So I was in the classic: the owner won't let go. I've got to do it,
It's an
or it
endless
won't get
cycle.
done.
Yeah.
And that's a vicious cycle. So there I was, which I would say is fairly common even to this day. I won't let go of this critical process because the stakes are too high. Yet, if I didn't have, if I had known about a better process and other things, I could have had somebody else doing it because I would have had the
Uh-huh.
process. If I had followed the process, I probably wouldn't have ended up in the
Or if
spot
you
where I
even
did.
documented your process, right?
Didn't have a documented process. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So I would say that to any business owners out there, You've exactly hit it on the head. And it's okay if things break. It is absolutely okay if things break. Now, you want to minimize things breaking and things not going the way that you want them to go, but only when that happens do you find out where your shortcomings are and where
Mm-hmm.
your training is lacking and where your processes are lacking. So you've got to, it's kind of like, I have 3 boys and they're all finishing up high school. Some are already in college. One's going to college next year. It's like, okay, guys, it's time to fly. Right. And so I'm sure they're going to make mistakes. And it's tough for me as a parent to say, to relinquish
Mm-hmm.
control. And businesses are no different, right? These are our babies. But you got to do it because you're there without that pain of those minor inconveniences or things not going to plan or to expectation. That's where the growth comes in. You find out exactly where you need to focus your energy. We have a process internally that we call desired outcomes, and the letters are the acronym. And one of the R is for refine, and on the diagram that we have, it's a circle, and but where the R is, the refine is an orange line that goes from the middle of the circle all the way back to the beginning. And so for us as a firm, it is part of our DNA now to identify interactions and or service issues that could have been prevented and should not happen in the future. In fact, we have our ConnectWise instance set up so that there's a box that our techs can check that will have someone go back later on and say what didn't go as well as it could have with this ticket, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So we've actually taken that anxiety that I have as an owner and baked that into what we do. So now my staff knows, I don't want to be working on the same issues twice. Right. And so, not all of those are easy fixes. Some, they may take 6 months to fix a process or something like that. But for the most part, you need folks throughout the organization, especially in what we do. Remember what I said, it is my opinion that we have more in line with UPS and FedEx than we do with Microsoft and Google because we are in the business
Right.
of logistics. That means we have to constantly be refining our processes and identifying where our shortcomings are so that we can provide greater value to our clients in ways where we're not reinventing the wheel on every ticket or every deployment or every onboarding. We need a process, and once you have the process, it doesn't stop there. You have to keep going and saying, okay, from the customer's viewpoint, what could have gone better here? I hear what you're saying about relinquishing control. Trust me, this has been really hard for me, and things have broken for sure. Some more visible than others, but I have to constantly remind myself that there's growth when things don't go right because we have a framework now that takes those into account.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there was some amazing things your staff had done when you kind of got out of the way. Because I think some people in other texts go, process in a system, yuck. I mean, that sounds like just a way to put guardrails and things around me that I don't need, right? There's some of us that are resistant to that, some of us. And but tell me about the things that came out of that you didn't expect that you got out of the way
Um,
and allowed them to do.
one of the things was relationship building. So I essentially served as a point of contact with our point of contacts at all of our clients. That wasn't necessary. In fact, my clients would prefer that it's not me
Mm-hmm.
because the folks that they work with now have more of a technical background and greater understanding of the particulars of their network than I would.
Mm-hmm.
So there, in the past, there was a lot of going back and forth. Client says this, engineer says this. I got to put the two together in a way that the client's going to be okay with. So what we've done is the this doesn't happen everywhere, but we have a couple senior leaders here, Marcus and Alan in particular, that are engineers by trade. Um, Very much early in their tenure here at Terminal B, operated with engineer brains, as I call it. Engineer brains cannot always be channeled to be customer focused. They just, in a lot of cases, they just don't get it. When we embarked on this process, they had to get it. We need people in the roles that they're in, service manager, operations manager, that actually understand what it looks like from the customer's perspective. Now I have employees that are capable of understanding things from both. They're able to speak with the engineer and knowing what limitations exist on on expectations. They know how to speak with the client and understand what the client, what their expectations are, and have discussions if they're not realistic or if they're misaligned.
Mm-hmm.
These are all soft skills, right? These are all soft things that the old Greg would have said, well, this is not related to delivering technical service, so I need to jump in.
Right.
They are very good at it, right? Now there's some, they have to resort back to our core values and our niches and all the stuff we defined, that they can revert back to and to refresh on when we started EOS. But now they're acting in with a different perspective, and they're acting in accordance to what Greg would expect and or how Greg would act, right? And so I think that's the big challenge. It's like we want to have our hands in all these things, but we can't. And so we need the best we can hope for is that someone is going to act in our stead the way that we would act, or at least drive outcomes that we would look to drive, right? They may take a different path to get there. So that was one of the big things. It's been remarkable, right? It's having those two individuals be able to switch hats, to say, okay, now I need to consider what this means for our staff, or are we meeting expectations with the client? Where is the gap between what we're doing and what they think we should be doing? So I think that's probably the biggest one. Is the engineering brain can't always convert, but when I set expectation of these staff members, they spread their wings. It was remarkable. I was like, okay, here's what we need to do. And there's a lot of discussions we had early in the process about, okay, you're going to do this, but I'm here for if you have any questions on how I would approach it. What things I think are important to keep in mind when you're having this discussion or you're kicking off this project and stuff like that. So it really has been extraordinarily gratifying for me to see folks come up in my organization from being engineers, to taking on, to talking to CEOs of other companies on what the best approach is for their infrastructures. That's just one example. There's been countless others where, we've enabled different business units to go to different people. And I was doing the billing at one point. We had to hire a controller. That was tremendously difficult for me because that's the billing. That's where the money comes in, right? And if that's not right, and honestly, I had this convoluted way of doing it that was easy for me when we had a controller come in. They've done an incredible job of getting our finances. Kyle, our finance manager, has done an incredible job of redoing our chart of accounts, making sure that we're aligned with every other MSP that mature MSPs look like, and making sure we have good reads on our margins and all of that. Things that I just didn't have the time to do because I was doing all these other jobs. So when I have a framework and I set expectations, the people that have stepped up to the roles that I'm referring to have done an incredible job.
So tell me about how you stopped doing the work of like 4 people or so, right? I think we all, as we grow, find ourselves in that. And I speak personally, I think I was more technical. So letting go of that was harder. Accounting fit nicely in the Venn diagram of things I hate and things I'm poor at. So that was one of the first to go for me. Let me hire great people, because also it's got to be rock solid. So I need to get rock solid accounting and the CFO level work done. So we all have our own, but how I will say personally, I feel like it sneaks up on you, because it's sure in the beginning when there's only 1 or 2 of you, but then it comes back again and again as you keep scaling. You realize I've got a few more hats, because even if you were even if you handed off billing, but then nobody was comparing how you're doing against other MSPs, et cetera. So how do you get rid of all that work? How did you quit doing
So
that?
we
How many roles
actually
were you doing?
So we actually had a 3-year horizon on this, and our first focus, if you recall, my anxiety at first was being contacted about by owners when we weren't meeting expectations. So kicking off EOS, the very first thing we focused on was service delivery. We had to be beyond reproach with our clients that we were delivering the service we said we were delivering, and that there was no questions about SLAs or process or anything like that. So I would say for the first year, we spent a tremendous amount of time on operations and service delivery while I was still doing the books. The next step was accounting. Once there was some level of, okay, Greg doesn't need to be involved in the service or in the operations as much, the next focus was on the finances and billing. I was doing all the finances by hand, not by hand. I was using QuickBooks, but we weren't leveraging ConnectWise
Right.
to do the billing and stuff like that. And for those MSPs that use ConnectWise, if you're not doing the billing from there, you don't know what you're missing. But once you start doing it, you can't imagine that you're doing it any other way. But that wasn't enough. So there was about a year there where it took us a year to just have our finances in a place where we could use that as a dashboard, right? We could say, here's where we've been and here's where we're going. Because it wasn't done. It was done conveniently for my sake by me.
I can relate
The
to that.
third leg of the stool for us is sales and marketing. And that's what we're doing right now. And we spent quite a bit of time and resources in making sure that we have a process and what our target profile looks like, and the industries that we work well in, as well as what is the sales to service handoff look like? How do you make sure that customers feel as special the day after they sign the paperwork as they felt the day before? So that's kind of like the latest iteration of our development. But you can't take all the hats off at once. Furthermore, there's financial constraints, obviously, so you can't just hire 6 people to do the jobs that you were doing. So I had to look and say which is having the greatest impact, which of these elements that I'm involved with is the lowest hanging fruit, if you will, right? We had to shore up service first. It wasn't way out of whack, but it had to be. I had to know that service was in a place where if I'm bragging about my company to a prospect, that when they sign on, that's what they're going to experience.
Mm-hmm.
The billing was secondary because the bills were still going out and we were still getting paid. It was not good, but it was happening. Honestly, as we did this process, my philosophy about being the only person in the organization that wasn't doing, fulfilling service or technical stuff. Once we did at EOS, the most impactful hires that we had were unrelated to technical roles.
Like
So
what?
the finance manager, for sure, right? Like I had no business doing. I mean, obviously, it's my company, and there's an expectation I would have done it for a while. But our billing was so complex and taking so long that I can't quantify what the leakage is, but it just wasn't an efficient process. And if your finances aren't in a good place, then you really don't know where you stand. So you can't measure growth without being able to measure anything, right? So that was a very impactful for our organization, was to have timely financials that are accurate.
Mm-hmm.
We're often okay with good enough is good enough because it's just one of the 5 things we're doing. And so as long as the money's coming in and there's enough to make it payroll, it's a little bit more complicated than that once you get out of it and you see that that function is not just AP and AR. Dispatch was another one. We had shied away from doing dispatch. That has had a profound impact on the ability for our clients to get with our staff that they need to get to without having to navigate all of our help desk and stuff like that. They can just pick up the phone and call. So having that person, having a client management, having discussions with clients on an ongoing basis. That's another role that we filled, has been huge because for a long time, we considered QBRs or TBRs or whatever you call them, we had considered them to be a burden, because it was taking us out of the ability to support our clients. But you know what? That's one of the most important things that you can do with the client, because it makes sure that both you and the client are literally and figuratively on the same page, and that there's no surprises, right? So they very much want to hear about our orange line process, because they know now that we review our tickets to make sure we're looking for patterns and we're looking for things that can be prevented. Because every time they don't have to pick up the phone, that's a win. Now, clients
That's
don't
right.
always see that, right? They don't always see that. But for us, we do a lot of flat fee managed services, and that is really the bread and butter of that. It's kind of like insurance, right? We don't want to pay out on that insurance. So we do everything that we can to make sure that claims aren't presented, right?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. In managing backups, when they dug into the data, we realized that MSPs that lost data were the ones that appreciated what we did because of the testing, and the others were ones that, when they started with us, and this is counterintuitive, but this is what the data showed. It was counterintuitive at first to me. If they had an issue, not with our service, but like if you've ever done backups, most work, and then you get a server that just it doesn't, nothing works. It just it's the biggest pain in the butt. And oddly enough, if we had one of those as one of the first couple, they valued what we did a lot more because they didn't get exposed to it. It was all of ours, but they saw all the issues and the number of attempts and how many it took because it's transparent. We expose all that, and so oddly enough, the smoother sailing it is, the less they kind of, it seems like, appreciated it because it just seems like it must work all the time, and sometimes all the other work you put in to know if A doesn't happen or if A and B don't happen, then it's C,
Yeah.
and building process around that.
You hear constantly with the MSP dilemma, which is, you know, um, a customer will look at a bill and they'll say the bill's too high. We never contact you. And it's like, okay, well, you never contact us because of all the work we do behind the scenes to make sure that you don't have to contact us.
Right.
I often give the analogy here at Terminal B of the duck swimming across the pond, where the duck's feet are moving like crazy to give the appearance of a seamless glide across the surface. That's very much how we operate. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we do to make sure that we're dotting I's and crossing T's, and that we're not going to have to revisit issues that we've addressed once, or hopefully once, but should issues arise again, that we nip it in the bud so it doesn't happen a third time.
Sure. Um, so it's been about how long since you started? And I know it's not a done thing or over, but about how long?
For EOS,
Yes.
yeah, it's been about 2.5 years.
Okay.
It's been about 2.5 years, and it's not an endeavor to take lightly. It requires a commitment, and it definitely requires the owner's commitment. And that's why I say, if this is not the framework for you, then find one that is, because you're the one that gets to make this decision. And if you don't adopt the framework, no one in the organization will.
Right.
So it's been about 2.5 years. It has not been all rosy. It's been uncomfortable. It's exposed a lot of um, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, but it's also exposed a lot of opportunity for us. And I referenced before, when we started at EOS, we probably had 150 issues that we put on our list that very first month. That's 150 things that we consider to
Wow.
be not okay, right? Just
Yeah.
for, it could be an improvement. It could be something's broken and needs to be fixed. It could be a billing process. It could be a staff management process. Everything that had ever come up, everything that we could possibly come up with was thrown on the list. It easily was 150 items. With the way EOS works is that we chip away with those over time. Now, I think we'll start a meeting. We meet every Monday. We'll start the meeting with 5 items on the list, and it's very rare for one of those items to carry over into the following week. And so that's pretty awesome, right? Like the ability to capture things that can be better and flagging them and say, okay, we're going to make a conscious effort to talk about this and we don't want to talk about it again unless it's still an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty powerful, right? That allows you these incremental victories that over time are maturing your organization. And things start to roll, right? When you solve one problem, everybody involved with that understands the approach and how to do it,
Right.
and where they need help, and barriers that they can't surmount on their own. But it's pretty awesome to look back and think about how overwhelming that list was at first. I mean, as an owner, I mean, we got to this point, right, because of the anxiety I had as an owner and relinquishing control. But when you
Right.
start the process and there's 150 things on the list, it's just like, oh my God, like this is going to get better. You think
Right.
like there's another 150 that'll show up next month, but we worked through them, and we were diligent. And I think my staff, you'd have to ask them directly, but I think from what I can gather, that they enjoy having structure. They don't like chaos, right? So business owners very much thrive on chaos because they're doing all these activities. But your
Yes.
staff, the people you rely on, they very much want to know what the ground rules are. They very much want to know what they're going to be measured based on, and they very much want to be part of the solutions that you come to grow the firm and be a part of that.
Well, that flows into what I was going to ask. So, culture, really important to me. And that's in a lot of areas. It means we need to work hard on choosing the right people to work here. We need to work hard on developing the people that we already have. We need to empower them. And I wanted to ask a question around that. Right now that you've gotten this, and you mentioned to me before, kind of empowering your team. So, what are some things somebody could do, takeaways, to empower their team or give them, the ability to do something outside of the
So, I
narrow
mean,
job scope?
it could happen at any level of the organization, but basically, so the way EOS is structured, you really could do EOS at the top of the organization, and it should trickle down. If you're doing it properly, it should trickle down all the way to the bottom of the organization. So each group or team would have their own EOS structure, if you will, and everything flows down. The biggest thing that I can offer in terms of trying this is, if there's something that you as an owner, but first of all, you always have to ask yourself, is this something I should be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that even goes for the people at the front desk, that even goes for people that are system engineers, because it's so often in what we do, we end up wearing hats unintentionally, different hats. Now, if it's intentional, that's one thing. If it's unintentional, then we have to ask ourselves, should we be doing this? Is this part of our role in the organization? Now, as a CEO or as a business owner, you can find an example of that and say, okay, here's an activity that I need to do. We're going to do a mailer, for example, just as a random example. We're going to do a mailer. And normally I would do it because, I've been doing it for 10 years and I just know how to do it. I know what I like, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, instead of doing it, what is more valuable is that you take a few moments and you write out what your expectations are of that, what the outcome is. Not, what is it that I as an owner, or I as the one fulfilling this, would do, and write down what those are. And you are writing down expectations that you can then share with someone. The important thing is that you need to get out of their way. You only help them if they come to you for assistance. Now, EOS provides a structure by which there's safeties, right? There's check-ins and stuff like that. But the idea is that rather than just doing it because it's easier, take the extra time, write it down. It could be documentation. It could just be notes to yourself or notes to whoever you're talking. And then share that with the person that you're expecting to do the task, and let them know, I am available to answer any questions if you have them. You can have a regular cadence with them to make sure that it's being executed as the way you would expect. But the more you do that, you're going to find that whether it's doing a mailing or hosting an event, people are going to be able to act in your stead, right? And the more you define these things, the more you're taking the variability out of what your expectations are. Now, there's certainly, this kind of leads me to another point that we discuss often in our organization. You heard the analogy of being in the logistics business. We very much understand at Terminal B when there's time for improvisation and when there isn't, right? And so I get very concerned when the expectation of my staff is to improvise. I just don't know what I'm going to get. I mean, over time I do. And as they are relinquished more and more control, they have more ability to demonstrate that they're acting like in accordance and what we would expect. But at first, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important that you set expectations and you let those people run that you enable them with your expectations and then see how they do. Again, things are going to break. Things aren't going to work the way, and sometimes that is worse than failure. Is the perception of failure for a business owner that, oh my God, my baby is now represented in a way that I do not agree with. But again, it's in those. It's when you have folks that you trust and you give them clear expectations, you will either get the outcome that you want or you won't. If you don't, this is an opportunity for growth. Now, if that continuously is the case, well, then you may not have the right person in the right seat. They may not be in the right role. They may not understand things. So you don't want to beat your head against the wall if, in fact, that continues to happen. But I think where I was surprised is if I took the time to define what needed to happen or what my expectations were, 9 times out of 10, it was actually what was happening. And so I was the one that was creating the burden. Because I can't play every instrument in the orchestra. I can only do, the things that I can do. And exactly. If I have to do those other things, I'm never going to do them all well.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Well, I'm curious, Greg, if I'm listening to this, guys, last chance, if you're listening to this afterwards, I'm going to tee up some questions, but if you're live, drop a question or two, we'll see if we can get to. But my question is, what resources? If I'm listening to this, I'm going, how do I learn more? What do I learn? It could be about US, it could be about any of the things you've talked about. Or what takeaways do you have? Like, think about doing this, or ask the best person on your staff this question.
So I'm in business owner groups. One in particular that's not related to MSPs. It's the same thing. It's getting out of your own way. If you don't have this epiphany or don't put structure in place, don't have the accountability, you're going to be realizing 10 years from now that you want those 10 years back. In other words, you're going to be working twice as hard for the same results. And you just don't want to turn around and see that to be the case. Now, again, it doesn't have to be EOS, but in the absence of structure, it's really hard to get accountability and drive growth or results. I think that's it. And trust is a two-way street, right? You trust your employees to execute on your behalf, and they trust that they're going to have a place in the organization where they can demonstrate what they can, what they're capable of. And that's pretty awesome, especially because I'm sure there's MSPs out there that have technicians that have been working for them for a really long time, and look at them in ways that aren't necessarily engineering roles, right? Mm-hmm. We get comfortable with our staff and say, well, that box is checked. I have a system engineer and they are engineering systems. But the reality may be that person may have capabilities above and beyond, and they already have the experience with the organization. So the value to you can be a great deal more than just a system engineer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen that in our own organization. Well, Greg, how people have questions for you, if they'd like to connect with you, what do you recommend? How do they do that?
Yeah, you can reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with other MSPs and help in any way I can. Our website's terminalb.com. We're located here in Central Texas. We do managed services, co-managed services. We do a lot of Azure and 365 and cybersecurity. So I guess most people are going to be MSPs. I'd love to connect and stay in touch. This community has been invaluable to me and is a wealth of resources. And none of us, and I said us, none of us want to reinvent the wheel. And you'd be hard pressed to tell me about a situation that's unique to you at this point. I hear that quite a bit too, that, you won't understand that. Okay, it might be slightly different, but we all face 90% ish of the same challenges. And you don't have to go at it alone. Just rely on the community to understand what options are, what options exist. And I think the MSP community has been most helpful for me, not in telling me what to do, but in keeping me from doing things that I would find out were wrong down the line. Right. So everybody's got a different path forward, but we want to learn from others.
You're not alone in this powerful, right?
Yeah.
I talk to so many MSPs that think I'm the only one that struggles with sales and marketing or whatever it is, structure.
Yep.
And you're not alone. There is a big group of us making those mistakes. I've already made them, and you can learn. Right. You can learn from Greg. You can learn from others. So,
yep.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Greg. This has been tremendously helpful and amazing. Make sure to connect with him on LinkedIn, etc., and at terminalb.com. So, speaking of connecting, follow, like, subscribe, make fun of us, whatever makes sense at mspmindset.com/news, or LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you social. Join the group to be in the know. Guys, every other Thursday we are live with amazing MSP here to help you. Follow, subscribe, stay tuned for next week's episodes.